Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the show.
Hello, how are you, John?
I'm doing fine. You know, I'm talking to you on April 1st, and over there in Tasmania, it's April 2nd.
April 2nd. I
Eh,
was
eh,
technically 24 hours early yesterday. My husband's like, "You seem to do this a lot." And I'm like, "I know, I'm just ahead of the game. What can I
the
say?"
world is fascinating. This is not an April Fool's joke. This is really happening, folks.
Yeah,
Okay,
it
so
is.
so I see some books behind you there. Fiercely Me.
Yes,
That's the book we're going to talk about. And well, before we do that, though, there it is. There it is. Excellent.
there it is.
Why don't you give us a little backstory on who you are? And we know now you're from Tasmania and all that. Tell us more about yourself before we talk about the books.
Yeah, I'd love to. So my name's Stephanie Rowe, and I was born in Brisbane, Queensland, which is north of the country. And me and my husband moved to Tasmania, which is a little island in the southern part of Australia, about a few months ago now. So we're really very much enjoying it here. I grew up traveling around Australia, honestly, in a bus. And I, as an adult, decided to go and travel around Australia myself. And so I've seen and witnessed a lot of beautiful parts. And at the end of last year, me and my husband, we went traveling around the world. So we went to Europe, America, and South America. So we've just gotten back from a big trip, and we are hitting the ground running.
Hmm. Well, sounds exciting. And you've written a book. I see that on the title it says memoir.
Yeah, I have. I have written a book. It's called Fiercely Me. And so when we were traveling last year, I was essentially rewriting it because what had happened was it's my first book, which I'm extremely proud about. And every time, well, not every time, but I feel like for a lot of first time authors, you write a book and you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then you're like, you have to come to the reality that it's the first draft and it's not amazing. And so I had to rewrite the book while we were traveling last year, which was really good. So it was something to keep me focused as well, and I had the space to really delve into how I wanted to write it in certain parts and really take the reader on a journey. And so it was hardcore, but it was really good. Like it really cut my teeth in writing, and so I was like, yeah, super excited about it, and I still am, and it's doing really well, and I'm really, I've been very busy the last few months, and it's been interesting because I received an email ages ago and I didn't even realize of like a review for it, and I didn't even have time to like sit down and read the review, and I just started crying. Like it was so beautiful, and I was just
Wow.
like, man, this book is really special. And yeah, so it's been a huge journey, not only as a writer, but then also, taking people on journeys and really understanding why you're writing the book. And I think for me it was more around sharing knowledge and going, like I felt a lot of the time that I was um, alone and castrated out, and so I didn't want anybody to ever feel like that. And so that was really the primary reason of why I wrote it, because I really wanted to connect with other people and ensure that others could see the love inside of themselves as well, and that journey of going, it's not very often that we stop and we take a moment to see what we actually appreciate about ourselves. So yeah, so it was, yeah, it was really, it's been a beautiful journey, and it's taken on its own now. Like it's this whole thing. It's just, yeah, it's
Yeah.
such a beautiful experience.
Well, I think all life is beautiful. Everyone has a unique story. And it's easier to say that than to actually write it down in a book. What specifically prompted you to write the memoir that you wrote? Because you have to be both factual and also incorporate some of your inner feelings, that some of the thoughts you had along the way of your journey.
Yeah, so it started, the reason why I wrote Fiercely Me at the start was because I wanted to take my story back. I wanted to go, you know what, this is this is what happened to me, because a lot of my life, people had taken my story away from me. So they had had their own versions through their own eyes, and they had essentially, that was it. That was what had happened, and I lost my voice. And so I wanted to write at the start to take my own voice back and my own story, and to go, no, no, this is what happened. And then as I was writing it, it was more than that. I realized it was so much more than that. And yeah, you do, like, there are a couple of things where I need to kind of update because the editor kind of changed the meaning of what I'd written. But there, you have to go into a place of complete vulnerability, and you have to go into, well, you don't have to, but it was my choice to. I chose to go into a place of complete vulnerability. And people don't have to do that. But I also understood that when you become vulnerable, you have an easier way to connect with others. So when you kind of let those walls down and let those shields go, it opens up the opportunity to connect with others in a really meaningful way. And so I knew the power of vulnerability, and so I didn't want to write this book and not be vulnerable, because it also means that this story stays with people a little bit longer than maybe another book. And I really was vulnerable, and I really was transparent, and I was honest, and I took people on journeys, through lots of parts of the book.
Hmm.
But that's why I did that, because I really wanted this book to be impactful. I wanted people to walk away and feel empowered, but also understand that I'm not perfect, and that I, like, just because I've done a lot of work and I've done all, I've kind of gone on this path, that doesn't mean that I started in a perfect place. And so, because that's, like, you have the opportunity to kind of paint yourself as better than you were. But I remember someone saying to me, "Wow, Steph, you're a bit brutal with yourself." And I was like, "Well, I'm not really brutal. I'm honest,
Oh,
because
yeah.
there's no point in going, I was this amazing person when I wasn't that amazing person." Like, I want to take the reader on that journey of going, this is where I started and this is where I ended up. And it's
Okay.
not impossible to do that.
Yeah. How far back do you go in your book? Where do you start? Do you start when you were just little?
Yeah, so I start off talking about some of my first memories when we were traveling Australia on a bus. And I was around 3 or 4
Really?
years of age. And
Oh,
then and like, that's the other thing. So I don't kind of I'm not your typical memoir writer where I'm like, oh, at this age this happens, at this age this happens. I didn't
hmm,
want to write it like that. I wanted to write it in the sense of what I learned through my journey of different parts of my life. And so because of that, it's not in chronological order. And I do put warnings, because there is a perception that everybody, like, that there's a industry for memoirs and autobiographies, and you have to stick to that lane. And I kind of didn't do that. I threw the lane away and was like, I'm going to do something a little different that suits me.
good,
So I
good.
start off at when I'm younger, and I'm around 4 years of age, and then I gradually go through until maybe, I think around eight-ish, and then I jump to things that really mattered to me. And so I went through a bit of family. So I went through some heritage stuff. So where my nan was a 10-pound pom. So after World War II, she came out on the boat. And
Oh,
I go through my dad's side of the family, and then I go through, some of the things that I had to learn as a person, and they were quite harsh. But I loved, I didn't love it then, but I definitely appreciate it now.
hmm.
Um, and so that's how I wrote the book. I wrote the book through, challenges, and then what I learned from those challenges, and I think that's really beautiful within itself. So it's more around that. So yeah, so I started off there, and then I ended in the most powerful way. Like, I'm so proud of the ending. Like, I remember reading the ending and just being like, oh my golly gosh. oh my golly gosh, like I can't believe I wrote this. Like this
Mhm.
is yeah, so it's a powerhouse of an ending, which I'm super
Wow,
proud of. So but
excellent.
yeah, so it goes on a bit more of a yeah, interesting journey of adventures that I've gone on, different things that I've learned. I put on a music festival, so I write about that, which is kind of cool within itself. um, yeah, so and then I talk about, like what happens when I what some because I couldn't fit everything in because otherwise the book would be huge. But I do go through different parts as a young adult and what I learned when I was younger, and some of the hardships that I faced and how I overcame them, and what I did with that knowledge. So
Mhm.
yeah, so it's very intriguing in that sense. Yeah, and it's not your conventional memoir, which I also love.
Hmm, sounds interesting. Is there something about who you are that people know you apart from having to write in the book? Like, did you said you did these things, you organized festivals. Did people know you for that reason? So that when you wrote this book, people, oh, like I know Stephanie Rowe. Let's read about more about her life.
Yeah, so I've had a very large life. So yes, was definitely known for putting on a festival. Very much so. Got lots of different industry people as well, which was cool. That we've kind of been lifelong friends. But I went into procurement, so contract negotiations, and so I've kind of gone on that journey, and I have done very very well, and which is at the behest of a lot of people in my life, a lot of my family. They kind of seen me and they were like, "Oh, you're not allowed to be successful. You're not allowed to go and go and succeed. You needed to stay in poverty. You needed to stay in your place. Like this is." You needed to stop and not come over to this side and be successful and learn lots of skills. So it's been interesting seeing that friction between the family and the perception, because obviously there's lots of conditioning as well, and
Yes.
if it's not up to the individual to actually go and develop, then they'll always have that position, and that's what they've decided to do, is always have that position. So I think also there's a lot of misogyny as well in my family, on my father's side. So yeah, so it's been interesting seeing a woman be very successful in her life, and how that, because it's very male dominated on my father's side, and there's lots of boys, and so like they've all been successful and they've all had they've all been praised, and they've had lots of beautiful things spoken about them, but not so much for me. And I found that really interesting, found that so interesting, that I was like, wow, okay. So yeah, so I do contract negotiations, and I have done that for a really long time, and I go in and I analyze purchasing trends, and I go and negotiate huge contracts. And yeah, so that's nowadays that's what I'm known for, but I'm also known for writing poetry as well. And so and I've done some stand up, which is essentially spoken word, which I love spoken
Mhm.
word. And so yeah, so I've got lots of diversity in that sense. So I'm known for lots of different things essentially.
Okay.
So done spoken word, and I've done I've got a poetry book coming, a collaboration poetry book. So that's
Saw that.
coming out on the 30th of April, and that's called The World in Our Words. And the reason how that came about was because I have always loved poetry. I've always loved words, if you couldn't tell. I've got a book, so I've always loved words. I love how you can take people on different journeys and essentially take someone through your eyes and your experiences. I've just always loved that. So yeah, so essentially I did a call out, and I was like, look, I went to my closest confidants and I said, look, I know you guys write poetry. You should come on board and write, and be published with me. And they were very hesitant because they didn't see themselves. And that's interesting within that, so a lot of these people, like a lot of my friends, didn't see themselves as poets, even though they were poets and had been poets, like essentially the whole time I'd known them. And so it was really pushing through that fear barrier, and really going, you know what, you are an incredible writer. You are an incredible poet, and you deserve to have your work read by people out there in the world.
Good.
Um, Yeah, and so I went through that process with them, and then I went and did a call out, and it was very similar. A lot of people have insecurities about their writing, and I was lucky enough to get 24 poets from all over the world to collaborate in this poetry book, and it's called "The World in Our Words," and it's also got 4 languages. Again, I went against the grain, and I was like, I'm not putting any conditions on this book. You submit the poetry that you want to submit. You submit it in your native tongue if you want to. Like, there was nothing off the table. Obviously, racism and bigotry was not accepted, but
Yeah.
everything else was. And so we've got Vietnamese, we've got Portuguese, we've got Spanish, and we've got Hebrew. So
Hmm.
they're the 4 languages. Yeah. So we've got people from Canada, America, England, Wales, Scotland, Australia. We've got Filipino, Canadian. We have a person from Mexico, person from Brazil, and we've got lots of minority groups as well. So which is amazing. So we've got
Cool.
mental health. We've got people that are blind. Like it's a phenomenal book, and like I got a lot of flack because a lot of people were like, "Why would you release a poetry book when it's not like a lot of it's in English?" And
Yeah.
it was up to the poet if they wanted to translate it into English if it was in their native tongue. And I was just lucky enough that a large portion of the people submitted either. In their native tongue and translated it, or they didn't, and I was completely fine with that because I really loved the fact that there's like it's truly multicultural.
Yeah.
Just not I think it's one of the first or maybe only poetry books that's going to be released with multiple languages in it, which is really
Fascinating.
cool.
That's
So
cool.
yeah, so I'm known for a lot of different things,
Yeah.
essentially. Like I've been in the music industry in Brisbane for a long time. I've been in writing communities for quite a while now, and outside of my professional life, I'm very community orientated. I'm very, very much about how I can connect with others and shine their inner beauty and their inner skills to the world.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I got your book up here, Fiercely Me, and the way you described it earlier when we were talking about it, it sounds to me that you possibly put little stories, and since it's not chronological, people you've come across in your life, and tell a little story about them. Perhaps tell stories about your parents and your siblings, or people who meant something to you in your life. Is that part of your book as well?
Yeah, it is. So the book I wrote in a way where it was snippets. So there is a lady, one of my favorite authors is Glenn Doyle, who wrote Untamed. And so I really loved how she did small snippets of stories. And so I definitely was influenced by that. So there's lots of different smaller stories in the book because I find that I get really busy and then I want to go back to the book and I'm like, oh man, I have to read the whole chapter. And so I've kind of written it in a way where you can kind of pick it up and essentially um, read the smaller chapters. And so there's lots of smaller chapters in the bigger chapters. And so I talk. I'm the eldest of 5 children. I talk, I think, a bit more about my mother and father than I do about the rest of the family. I'm quite generic in the way that I kind of talk about the rest of the family, in the sense of, but I don't call anybody out. But it is interesting because um, I have had someone come back and go, "Oh my," well, actually not one person, there's been quite a few people go, "Oh my God, I've got like an uncle like that or an auntie like that, or, my grandma's like that." Like, "Oh my God, my mom, she does that all the bloody time."
Yeah.
And so what I realized is that it's just not me, right? Like it's just not me that goes through these things. And I suppose that's what I mean by when the book was released, is taking it on its own because people just connected with it, right?
Yeah.
And what I realized was that my story is just not my own, it's everybody's story, right?
Yeah.
Because we've all got different personalities in our life. We've all got to, people have been it's been such an easy book for people to connect with and go, oh my God, that's how you deal with that kind of personality trait. Oh, okay, cool. And so, yeah, it's been really beautiful in that sense of being able to I didn't need to call anybody out. What was more important for me was to call out the behavior types, and how people, how they actually dealt with certain situations, and then how I dealt with it, because sometimes it can be soul crushing dealing with some of the things that I've dealt with. And so, like, how I definitely have a lot of empathy and compassion for a lot of people. So being able to bring that to the forefront as well, and to be able to show, even in the most harshest conditions, having empathy for another human being is really important. So yeah, so I do talk about my family, and I do talk about, like, there's little snippets about my siblings, but I think majority of it is honestly about my mum and dad. And because my dad's an addict, so he's still an addict. He's like in his 70s, and he said to me a few years ago now, I'm never giving up. I really love drugs, and I don't want to give up. And I was
Mm.
like, you know what? You're in your 70s, dude. Like, if that's what you want to do, then that's what you want to do, right? I can't change your mind, and you've done this your whole life. So yeah, and I, I do touch on it, like what in the book, how it affects, being a child of an addict, how that affects you as a person when you start to grow up and you start to develop, and then you become an adult, and some of the characteristics that come out, like, um, I definitely have issues around abandonment, and around being left alone, and being respected. And that comes from being brought up in a family where you're not chosen, you are not the first choice. Yeah,
Mhm.
like, there's drugs, alcohol, women, men, like, it doesn't matter what it is, it's always something else. And so to be brought up underneath,
Sure.
in those conditions can be quite difficult. So
Yeah.
I'm more talk around how I dealt with that, and how that affected me, but then how I work through them. And the other thing I talk about is, like, there's this conception of, like, triggers, and, like, once you deal with something,
Yeah.
it's done. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh baby cakes, that is not correct. It's not correct at all. Because what anyone that's had some really serious trauma, you realize that you just live with it, yeah.
Yeah.
And when a trigger comes up, you deal with the trigger, obviously, afterwards, if you choose to, because also people don't choose to. But for me, I choose to deal with why it came up, where it comes from, so that next time it's a little bit less, or I have a little bit more self awareness of how I can deal with that trigger. But yeah, it's really more around how I learned, and what my thoughts are around that. And people that are just like, oh well, it's your crap, and blah 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, it is my crap, but having
Mhm.
empathy towards someone that's essentially has been traumatized, and is trying their best to deal with their reactions and their emotional reactions, would be appreciated. And so, like, I talk about that as well, because I found it really interesting how, and you could just definitely tell people who haven't kind of experienced, severe trauma, how they're just like, oh, well, just get over it, like, just get over
I
it, just
know.
stop talking about it. And I'm like, that's really not the solution to this. And so drawing light to that, and going, you know what, like, as a society, we can actually overcome these things. But we need to be educated. We need to be able to talk about it. We need to be able to put our hand up and go, yeah, man, like, I actually suffer from that. Or I didn't realize, my husband had his first trigger, I think a week and a half ago, and he didn't know what was going on. And he didn't, and I had to step him through. I'm like, this is called an emotional trigger to something. And so the reality is that lots of people haven't actually experienced that, which is probably a good thing, yeah.
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
But yeah, so I talk about lots of different things and complexities, because I found I was like, this is my platform to actually draw attention to these things, and to hopefully benefit the reader in one understanding, but also letting them know they're not alone. And it's just had such a wonderful, wonderful response. Like, oh man, I think there's been two reviews which I've just loved, and one of them was, I feel like I'm just sitting down at the pub, on the corner with her just drinking some beers. Like that was how they described the book. And then the other one was like, oh my God, like it's like she got a mirror up and she put it in front of my face. And it was like I was forced to look at myself and have self-reflection. And I was just like, oh man, like I couldn't have asked for a better
Yeah.
response, like
Yeah.
it was just so beautiful. So yeah, and like again, it's taking people on their journeys within their own kind of family dynamics and social dynamics, and I think that's beautiful as well as connecting through word.
Yeah. Just listening to you describe the book in these last few minutes got me to understand why you titled it Fiercely Me.
Yeah.
Did it take a while for you to come up with that, or it just hit you one day?
So it was titled something else actually. It was titled The Reflection Looking Back at Me in the Mirror. And it just was like it just didn't work. And I was going to work one day, and like I'd been, the whole process, honestly, there'd been a lot of people within the publishing industry saying, you can't write like this and you can't do that. And you need to do it this way. You need to do it that way. And so I just kind of was like, well, it's my book. I'm
Mm,
self-publishing it. Like I'm paying for this. I can do it however the hell I want to do it. And it's also actually, interestingly enough, I have actually put a whole thing at the end of the festival. I've put a whole recommendation to like lots of musicians, because I was like, I can do this. Because my cousin was like, why are you putting that in there? And I'm like, because I can, because it's my book.
mm,
But yeah, so anyway, I was I had really come up with a lot of like a lot of people were resisting my process and why I was doing the book the way that I was. And so I was going to work one morning and I was like, ah, oh, damn it, man. And it just came to me like this. And it was like, I need to rename the book Fiercely Me. Like,
mm.
because I'm just so, when I know something, I know something.
How
So,
did you know when to stop? Your life obviously is far from over, and I'm sure you're going to do many more incredible things. So why did you stop where you did?
so I stopped where I did because I knew that it was like, it was either going to go on forever or it was not. And so, um, what's in this book is essentially what I was most passionate about in
Mm,
my soul. Like this is what my soul said. Like my soul was like, no, this is the parts where I really, you know, felt most connected to and have felt most connected to in my life. And so I just kind of got to the end and was just like, oh, this is it. I just felt really good about that. And
yeah.
I felt really, really good about the fact that I knew as well. Like, because my cousin's like, oh, why haven't you done this? And why haven't you done that? And I was just like, oh, I just feel like it's good. I'm in a good place. I feel really confident with how much I've written about. And to be honest, when the first draft was 40,000 words, and then the last was like 87,000. So
Okay.
I essentially doubled it. So yeah, between the two, the
You,
two
you edited
versions,
you edited upwards.
I did edit it upwards. So it's like it's a decently sized book, I
Sure.
think.
It's a nice looking book. Yeah.
Um, Yeah. But yeah, so there was a lot of controversy around the book, which I kind of found interesting because I'm like, oh well, there's nothing like me being a pencil, pushing the boundaries of the
Hmm.
publishing world as well.
Hmm. So you've done a memoir. Now you're working
Yeah.
on finishing up this poetry book. You're in just a final few weeks before it's
Yeah.
out there. By the time this airs, it'll already be available. Do you have any plans for any future books? And as a part two to that question, are you or will you ever entertain fiction?
Yeah, so I am. So me and my husband, we were in quite a bad car crash at the end of last year. We were in Peru in the Amazon, and the driver of the tour bus drove us off a cliff. So we nearly died, and it was really horrific. And that's where my husband got triggered a week and a half ago. Was around was around that car crash because we've both been quite dissociated from life since we've come back because obviously we had quite severe issues with our bodies. So I am going to go into nonfiction around that book, and so I want to turn it into a movie. And so essentially, I want to kind of create a story, and I want to weave it in with um, parts which are truthful, if that makes sense. So parts of my life, but then I kind of want to push myself and I want to push into an area where I haven't actually gone before,
I,
and I
I,
want to kind of,
yeah, I think that's called based on actual events, which leaves a
yeah.
lot of leeway.
Yeah, exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And so I actually went to a writers festival a couple of weeks ago, and there was a lady there, and she goes, "You need to turn this into a movie or a TV series." She's like, you got to do
Well,
this, you know.
yeah.
So that's what I'm going to be working on next.
Hmm.
Is that it? Which I'm excited about. So like outside of the poetry book being aired at the end of this month, oh well, not aired, but being released, but at the end of this month, I'm going to start working on that. And I'm super excited about that because it's like I'm going to be able to push myself intellectually. I've got a huge imagination. I get to kind of work with that. It's going to be exciting book.
Hmm. Sounds pretty good. Want to talk about your website?
Yeah. So I have so I sell my book Fiercely Me through my website, www.mrsrowe.org. ORG. And I also have social. So I'm on TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. So TikTok, I'm Mrs. Rowe author or Stephanie Rowe with two N's. Or on Facebook, I'm Mrs. Rowe author. And Instagram, I'm Mrs. Rowe author as well. So you can come and find me. Come and check out I've got my book on. It can be sold as an ebook or a physical hard copy. So, and I sell both of them through my website, mrsrowe.org. So I am on all socials. Come and say hello. Come and come and follow me. I'm always up to something.
Interesting.
um, but yeah, I didn't release it onto Amazon because I don't like Amazon.
Yeah,
Ethically, I don't
I don't
like them.
blame you.
So I just did it myself.
Good. And how's that going? I mean, when was this released and how are sales up till now?
So it was released in the 4th of February. And the sales have been really good, honestly. So I've been really, I think everybody said to me, "Oh, you're not going to sell any books. Why are you doing this? This is crazy." Blah 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 blah
Mhm.
blah. And then, honestly, I just realized that it's the perception. Yeah, it's the perception of that human being and their experience that
Mhm.
they wanted to put onto me. And I've been selling them really, really well. I've been so surprised. I went to a market, I sold really well there.
Oh,
And
good.
now we're at a point where people that I don't know are buying the book and
That's
just kind of
good.
sharing it. Yeah. And so, like, I was just kind of like, thanks, guys, for always doubting me because there's nothing like me turning the odds around and showing that it can be done with a lot of hard work and a lot of
Hmm.
grit. But yeah, it's been going really, really well. And so essentially it's just now going into networks outside of my immediate networks, which is,
Okay.
I couldn't have asked for anything better.
Super.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just before we wrap up, I have this thing I do now. I'm going to put you on full frame, and we're going to let you give a final pitch to Fiercely Me and why people, not just in your part of the woods, but around the world, why should they order this book?
Wow, that is a great question. So, Fiercely Me is a story about a young girl that grows into a woman that lives through many different experiences and she travels with not a penny to her name. And so, through that, she gets to experience the world in a really different way. She also realizes that money and status within society is not everything that you need. And so, she's an underdog and how that underdog lives through poverty and travels with nothing to become the woman that she is today is the most powerful and empowering story. And she ends it in a way where it is not about her. It has nothing to do about her. She realizes that this world is about connection and uplifting others and bringing people together and to, heal the wounds that we've all got to be able to liberate and to go forward. And so this story is really powerful and anyone can connect with it.
Well said. Well said. I think you've convinced many people. Stephanie, it's been a delight speaking with you,
Thank you so much, John, for having
and
me.
Oh, you're welcome. When you write this other book about your crash based on actual events in Peru, then please contact me. We can do this
I
again
will.
sometime later this year, next year.
Thank you so much, John. It
You're
really
welcome.
means a lot that you have these platforms for authors
Okay.
like me. So thank you.
Oh,
And I
you're
hope you
welcome.
have sweet dreams.
Okay, I will. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for watching. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please consider hitting that like button and leaving a comment. You could also subscribe and ring that bell because I release 2 episodes per week, one on Wednesdays and one on Saturdays. And if you are an author, I would love to hear from you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.